Mike, it's the time of the year I know that you are getting asked question after question. It's just the nature of what we do.
Oh yeah.
People, whether they're reflecting or whether they're looking forward to something new, or we're just trying to. It's you know what, end of school, in my opinion, I never taught, so you have to correct me. End of school is almost like New Year's as far as resolutions, as far as looking back over what's has happened and looking forward to the next go round. Uh, have you been getting questions? Is there something that we could talk about today that will help all those people as they get ready for the next go round?
Well, I was thinking maybe we could talk about having a classroom management system,
Okay.
because a lot of these guys that I'm getting calls from, you're right. Some of it's like, what are we doing next year? Hey, Mike, can you look at this 4 sets of drill that's been written? What do you think? Little tiny tidbits that don't take a lot of time. But there's a lot of people that are in the midst of job interviews.
Okay.
And I really feel, and I don't know, I can't prove this, but I really feel like one of the most important questions to an administrator, if they're interviewing, and even a fine arts coordinator, is, what is your classroom management like?
Okay.
How
So
do you manage your classroom?
when you're saying classroom management, are we talking about discipline? Are we talking about just the structure of our teaching?
Mostly in this particular podcast, I'm thinking of it more in terms of discipline and making sure that we get the rear ends in the seats and
Right.
things like that. But it does encompass, of course, your band culture, and, and your band discipline will be highly influenced by your lesson plan.
Sure. So
And
get us going. What can we do then should we approach it from the standpoint of, do I have a management program? If I actually stop to look, do I consciously think about a management program? And then if not, or even if so, how can we tweak those things?
yeah, it's you've got to have something in place. But you're correct. I don't know how many times I've had like a student teacher and you kind of turn them loose on an ensemble. They kind of watch for a couple of days. Then you say, hey, why don't you go ahead and do the warm-ups and maybe run the march, and then, and if they're doing my top wind ensemble, they're like mother hens. They'll just take the student teacher under their wing, and, and they'll go, hey, actually we're going a little faster here, so, or they'll tell them at the end, hey, you did a really good job. But then if you turn them loose on the third junior high band
By
and
nature.
say, by nature, and you just say, hey, why don't you go ahead and do the warm-ups and run through the march? You've been watching me for a couple of days here. And those kids, it's like fresh meat to the lions, Yeah, they're going to test. It's like I say, it's like a security guy, night security guard. He'll test all the doors, but he wants them all to be locked.
Right.
And that's how those little rascals are that are, they're not nefarious. They're not trying to set the band hall on fire, I hope, but they just want to see, how much can I get by with? And then you realize real quick that they don't really have any discipline plan, or really have no, thought process in terms of, how do I control all these little ring-tailed rascals, from
I think
doing
that's
things.
probably a more fair way to say that, Mike, that it's not that they neglected to create, or they just don't care. I don't have a prep. It's just that you don't do it till you don't realize you need a process until you're in the middle of it sometimes.
Yeah, and most student teachers and you, when you went to school, you had great band directors.
Right.
So you don't really, if you were going to be a band director and get a full-time job teaching, that would not be in the forefront of your mind, because in your experience, band kids just, for the most part, behaved. There was a little extra talking, spit out your gum, sit down.
All right.
You know what I
Culture
mean?
was there.
The culture was there. So you just kind of assume that all bands are that way. But then you walk into a different situation. It's like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do?
And I also think that sometimes as a teacher, we walk in and go, I can't wait to make great music. I'm going to show everybody how I can direct. And it's not necessarily an ego thing.
It's not a put down, but yeah, and they want to impart all their knowledge in one lecture.
Open that fire hose. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're like going, hey, we had a 48-minute rehearsal and you talked for 46 minutes. So you might need to have your own podcast.
Okay, so you've thrown this student teacher in front of the third band at the junior high, and antics have ensued.
Antics have ensued. So I guess kind of backing up on that, it's like, I think when I talk to directors who are going to interviews, there's many times they'll ask if they can have a kind of a fake interview. And,
Sure.
we'll do it over
Yeah.
Zoom and I'll pretend like I'm the administrator and I've got my list of questions.
And I think that's genius. Rehearse that stuff.
Yeah, well, we rehearse it and that's what I tell them. I'm glad you said that because I like to tell them, this sounds real weird, but you need to rehearse your interview. You need to rehearse your answers. If nothing else, just talk in front of a mirror and watch your face.
Say public speakers do it all the time when we're starting.
Yeah, and I've heard people say, just be yourself, whatever. There's some truth to that. You need to be yourself, but you'd better put on the best part of yourself when you're talking to them. And so when they ask that age-old question, because they're administrators, especially, and even the fine arts ladies and men, but administrators especially, one of their major concerns is not whether we're going to make a one. Their major concern is how many kids are going to come down to my office every day.
That's a great point.
That I'm going to have to deal with. And so they'll ask that question, said, how do you deal with classroom management? And they might even ask, what's a difficult situation and discipline you've dealt with and how did you solve it? They'll ask questions like that. So I've kind of lined out maybe just a little bit of a way to do it. And I'll preface it with this. There's 1,000 ways to do this correct. This is like buying furniture for your house. There's 1,000 ways and everyone has their own taste and their own way of doing things. This just happens to be the Mike Lunney way. And I know it's worked for me. And I would like to say that with discipline, it has to match your personality.
Right. Genuine. Yeah.
Yeah. It has to be genuine. Some people are the Marine kind of gunny sergeant kind of discipline, but they're still fair and they're still respectful. Kids will respond to that. But if you're that type of personality, I've seen my high school band director was actually extremely laid back. I mean, we didn't like get away with things, but I mean, there was not this, I'm going to shout at you. I remember in 4 years, I remember him raising his voice one time. That was it. Right. And we had a great band program. So I would like to say that to anyone who's listening. Make sure take whatever discipline plan you do and make it fit your personality. Okay. The other thing is this, when you're putting together a discipline plan, I wish I could speak. Make sure that you don't make too many rules. Because if you make rules with a consequence and you just line it out in a band manual, then all that's going to happen generally is bad things.
Right.
Because, go ahead.
No, we've hinted at that conversation before because in my naivete, well, I almost said that word. We're both having that.
Yeah, we are. It's
what's in the air?
That's right. I'm just drinking water. I promise.
In my naivete, said, man, you got to get in there and create a band manual and line that crap out.
Oh,
you said, hold on there, buddy.
Hold on now. For two reasons. One is, and I've encountered this as a young director, you'll make a rule the next person who forgets their horn is going to have to do 3 days of ISS. And so the next
best player.
the next day, the most intelligent, responsible, best attitude kid in your whole band program will jump out of the car at the drop-off lane and leave their instrument in the car and it's gone with dad or mom. And so then you're stuck. The next person who I see chewing gum is going to get 2 swats or spend 3 days in ISS, and then it's never the kid that you're kind of in your mind, you're thinking of targeting. So you've got to be careful because if you set out those consequences, then, you got to hold your own feet to the fire.
You're going to say the problem with that is if you don't make that apply to everybody, number one, it's not real. It's not valid.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, the other kids go, okay.
Yeah, you've lost all credibility.
Right.
Yeah. And the second thing to that, I think is just as important because I faced this problem. We're all humans.
Yeah.
We'll make a choice. If you skip a rehearsal, you have to do 1 hour practice time in a practice room the next day.
I can deal with that.
Yeah, the kid will go, hey, man, I can go out with my friends on Monday night and we can eat pizza and go run around town and have a good time. And heck, my dad didn't get home till 5 o'clock anyway. I was going to practice anyway. So you see that they can just make a choice. They can just make a choice.
Or rationalize. Yeah.
They can rationalize it. And I think it is simply a choice. They simply go, I'll do this instead of this. And they will defy what you need done if you just have strict, this is the rule, this is the consequence. I know it sounds almost like too politically correct, but leave all your options open.
Sure.
leave everything open with that.
Or
One of
give
the first,
yourself enough wiggle room to handle any situation. Yeah.
yes, yes, because sometimes your decisions as a band director, sometimes it requires justice, sometimes it requires mercy. And I found through experience that every parent wants mercy for their child and justice for every other band member.
Right. And I think
And
we've
that's
said
just
this
human
before too.
nature.
Even your band kids subconsciously, not necessarily a conscious thought, but we judge ourselves on intention and we judge everybody else on action.
Correct.
We don't care why the other person had a problem. They messed up. But the
That's right.
reason we messed up is a very
Yeah,
valid reason.
there was a reason. Yeah, there was a reason. Yeah. So those are things psychologically you have to deal with. Now, in terms of straight out logistics, something to really say to your administrators, I'm going to play the role of I'm the new director of interviewing for a job. I would say I always have a really accurate seating chart, and I learn all their names as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Because that's job one in discipline. In fact, when I had up to like 160 kids in band, we had, I think it was called Grade Speed or Grade Sheet. It was the computer program, and you could print off their picture from their file with their name and their grade level. And I would print all those off on my computer, cut them out and put them on index cards.
Okay.
And I'd do flashcards all summer.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then I'd do those flashcards like just once a day. I mean, it only took 5 minutes. But then the ones I really started to memorize, I'd take out of the deck. And until finally, when summer band hit, at least for 99% of the kids, I could look at them and I could tell you what grade level they were, what they played, and what their name was. And that makes a big difference when you go, hey, Leroy, you need to scoot over 2 feet.
Right.
Instead of,
Right.
hey, you in the white T-shirt with the
Holding a saxophone.
Oh, yeah, you saxophone person, because we wouldn't want the kids to do us that way.
Right.
Hey, band director person. In fact, my kids were funny. We had so many student teachers, they'd always just call them student teacher person. And I said, guys, we can't do that. You've got to use their names. But it was an inside joke. Hey, student teacher person, can you help me? Because they would have like sometimes 3 a semester. We'd have student teachers. So we'd say, no, they have names.
From my side of the world, I'm going to see if this resonates with you. Back before we had computer programs to do everything for us, as a salesperson, one of the first things I had to do every year was learn my territory. And I actually had forms, kind of like your index cards.
Mm-hmm.
And the form would make me, it was almost like an initial conversation thing that we would have. But what's her name? Best contact? What's the wife's name? How many kids do you have? Basic things that you're thinking that has nothing to do with sales. It has everything to do with sales.
It has everything to do with it.
You learn who they are, you create relationship, and it gives you an opportunity to recognize somebody and have a real conversation. They know that you have taken the time.
Yeah.
And I would think it's the same way in classroom management. Your students will respect the fact that you're taking the time to get to know who they are, and your administration. And that's really who we're talking about right now.
And no doubt. And those little index cards, they went in the file cabinet. And then if I found out like Susie Johnson played softball, then I'd pull out that little file and I'd get Susie's cards and plays varsity softball. I could put it back in there because I can't memorize all that. But then if I have a situation where I need to deal with that student, it's kind of nice to have that little file, that little card that says, oh, they're in National Honor Society, or they play football, or they're in the ag program, or they work at the Dairy Queen. What's their pet's name? Just whatever comes up in conversation, I think makes a big difference. So have that accurate seating chart. Make sure you memorize the names. Make sure the admin knows that's something that's in your plan.
Right. I'm chuckling a little bit though, but I'm of a certain age that analog stuff is really much more effective for my memory and my plan than something that's tucked away in a file. I have to remember where I put it in the file in my computer. But
yeah, well,
whatever works.
That's because we're old.
We're old.
The younger directors, they would, even in my little study at home, I have 2 file cabinets full of stuff, and I reach and get it, and a good friend of mine, Luke McMillan and David Spruill, they have their entire business on the cloud. I don't think there's one piece of paper that contains anything of their business. It's all electronic, and that makes sense because I made the comment one time talking about analog. I said, what's going to happen if, what if the cloud goes down? What if you lose all that stuff electronically? And they go, well, I think it's safer there than in a file cabinet. What if we have a fire? So you don't have any backups on your file. Yeah, well, that's a good point. Thank you, young people, for making me feel stupid.
Right. And the other side of that too, man, this is way too far off. But if you have too many files and you don't use them all the time, you'll forget where the file is. It's going
Yeah,
to be an hour process of digging through a file cabinet. But
yeah.
anyway, I keep hijacking you. Sorry, I'm talkative this
No,
morning.
no, that's all right, man. You're getting excited over there. You like this discipline thing.
I
We'll
like
get into that.
management. Let's put it.
You like management. Yeah, let's not go. But never mind. That got kind of talk about off topic.
I just like a plan. Well, maybe that's
Yeah,
even bullet down the
plan.
floor.
Okay. So after the seating chart, something to think about in terms of your band setup. Proximity is your friend in discipline. Stay off the podium as much as possible. Walk around the band. If it's and we all know the truth. Some groups are rowdier than other groups. If it's my third junior high band, there's going to be a big old giant aisle right down the middle of that setup where I can get
Sure.
the trombones and baritones in about 5 steps without having to step over things and
Sure.
work my way through the band hall. And then always be walking around. The cool thing in marching band is we all pretty much use some sort of sound system with a microphone, and we carry the microphone. The cool part is the kids hear the voice coming up from out front,
Right.
but you can be anywhere on the field and it freaks them out. It's great discipline. It's like, hey, Derek, you need to be quiet and get in your spot. And Derek's looking around. Says, I'm right behind you, Derek.
And don't think that didn't happen.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, it's a tangent morning. During third quarter, I would go up to the press box at Wiley, but my microphone could still reach the sound system. So I'd eat a piece of pizza and have a Coke, and then I'd chew out band kids when I'd see them in the bandstand, and they had no idea where I was at. Yeah, said, do not put down that baritone. You're a trumpet player. Put it down and get back in your spot. And it's coming through the speakers. They're looking around like it's omnipotent or something. I'm just eating pizza in the press box, looking out at them. So proximity is your friend. In that case, proximity is your voice. They don't know where you're coming from. They know you're right there. Experiment with different setups. Experiment with it. I know my beginner ones, I'd put them like in 3 rows. Then each week I'd rotate the row. You know what I mean? They'd rotate that way. It's just like I'm a Baptist, so I think I can say this. It's like the back row of the Baptist church where the youth group sometimes sits. We would pass notes, make plans. Are we all going to Wendy's? What are we doing after this? Let's go run around.
How much longer is this guy going to talk?
Yeah, but if you sit in the front pew, you can't really do all that.
Right.
You know what I mean? So we would just rotate the pews, I guess you'd say. Just
That makes
bring
sense.
those backslidden brass players up to the front for a little bit, Yeah, another one is, and this is hard to do for some people and easy for others, speak in a strong voice and show enthusiasm. Fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
You've got to speak you got to use your band director voice. I'm not saying people have to yell, you know what I mean? But you can't just, hey, everybody sit down. So it's time to start, please. Come on, guys. Really? You're going to treat me this way? You fall into that routine. So everyone sit down and get your horn. We're about to start playing in 30 seconds, and then start whatever you need to do. Okay. And this is fun to say on a podcast. Talk less. Talk less and have them play more. And that is a fault of Mike Lunney. Oh my goodness. I have to fight that when I go clinic. I almost have to tell people, the band directors from clinic, and just tell me to move to something else, because I'll just get hooked onto one thing like a pit bull on a T-bone steak bone, and I'll just gnaw on it until no end. And the kids are just like, they're like sharks.
Get it.
Yeah, their eyes float back into their head, and they kind of, you lose everybody. So, the more you have them play, especially a rowdy group, don't spend 15 minutes discussing a plagal cadence with your third junior high band, or a Neapolitan sixth chord, or the overtone series, or whatever. In the top wind ensemble, maybe a brief little music theory thing at a given moment.
Fun fact, right?
Yeah, fun fact. And a few kids might actually appreciate it. Most would just go, I just want to play louder and higher. Give me my music. But in a rowdy group, if that mouthpiece or their mouth is on that horn, there's less problems. There might not be as good a music, but there's definitely less discipline problems. It doesn't really create better music necessarily, but you've got to kind of get them into submission that way. It's like breaking a horse, like an old rodeo thing. Got to break a horse. You don't break a horse by talking to it. you jump on top of that horse, a bronco rider, and they take care of business and they figure out how to get that horse under control. Same thing with a band. You got to let them play because they got to let them buck a little bit, got to let them do their thing. You've got to fight against them a little bit psychologically. And pretty soon they'll go, this isn't so bad. I guess we'll listen to this guy. Or they'll come around.
And you know how I work here. I actually really enjoy these because I learn a lot listening to you and our friends, and I think the key point here was talk less, play more.
Oh yeah.
We can also incorporate that autonomy aspect of it. Instead of you having a conversation about all the theoretical things that you said, what if we played through it and we said, "Do you think we could play that better?"
Yes.
And do it again, or play through it and said, did anybody do anything that run through that you could make better the next run through? All right,
yes.
Let's do it. And again, you are making them think about the music. You're making them think about playing. You're making them think about tone, as opposed to, man, I got a funny joke.
Yeah. Or I just finished playing. Now he's going to spout information to us. Or even you'd make a great band director, by the way. And then I would even be more, not specific, but you could get to a spot in the music and stop and say, raise your hand if you think we should crescendo there.
Right.
Now raise your hand if you think we should decrescendo. Raise your hand if we should put a rallentando right there. Raise your hand if you think we should just stay straight tempo. And then that just makes their little brains kind of start to turn. And we're trying to make them into little tiny band directors where they're evaluating the whole time. And you're exactly right. If you don't ask them to do that, they will play their notes, nothing but the notes. So help them God, if we're lucky. And then when they put the horn down, it's like, hey, I think I'm going to empty spit on this person next to me's shoe, or
you're exactly right.
Yeah. I'm going to do something to get attention. This little cute girl sitting next to me, I'm going to kind of make eyes that direction and ask a question, so all of a sudden their mind goes from, this is how we play. This is how we play.
Right. And I'm going to give you a real world scenario to reinforce what you just said. And
it's how you met your wife.
No.
Go ahead.
That's another podcast. But
okay,
when we junior high band, I was in junior high band, like as most of us are that made it this far in the music world, and I had a situation where a director stopped the entire band because one of the French horn players was trying to figure out how to attach a saxophone neck strap to her French horn instead of actually playing the French horn. And
that makes sense to me. Yeah.
But my point of the conversation is, I don't know that that's 100% on the kid. Maybe that's on a director that was spending too much time talking and not playing.
I think there's plenty of people to blame in this situation.
You understand what I mean, though?
Oh, I understand completely what you're saying.
If you got the horn on your mouth, you're not trying to put an alto sax neck strap on a French horn.
Yeah, just keep them busy. And we talked about asking questions and like raising of hands and a group question. Be careful asking rhetorical questions because it just encourages more talking. Things like I've heard like people say, why are y'all talking? Why aren't you paying attention? They'll answer you. Yeah. So you'll have 50 voices answering you. I said, stop talking. No, you didn't.
How do I
you ask why? You ask, why are you all talking? And so they're, oh, well, because I've got athletics next period and I forgot my football pads. And oh my gosh. So it's like, don't ask rhetorical questions, especially to a rowdier group, because they don't understand that. They'll just answer and they'll burn up another 5 minutes and then you get upset and then why are you still talking? Well, you
just asked a
question, Mr. Lunney. Yes. And so it's just a vicious cycle. I think a really good way of doing that I found has been a good technique that was taught to me by Luke McMillan, who was one of my assistants for a while. He would always say the question and then he would say the name who he was asking it to. Instead of, hey, Derek, what do you think we should do here? Is like, what should we do here musically? Derek Killam.
Okay.
So you see what happens? The whole band, when you're asking a question, pretty soon the whole band's trained to, he's asking a question, he might call on me.
Right.
So the whole band's thinking of the answer, but you only call on one person. But if you go, hey, Derek, tell me what you would do here, the rest of them zone out immediately because I'm not asking them a question. So it's a little thing, but maybe if they can put that in their bag of tricks.
It's kind of subtle, but I see what it does there.
Something to kind of throw into that interview process as you're doing things, And the last thing about questions, try your hardest to give support when their answer is not correct. I've heard so many directors, I'm not saying this is incorrect to do, but they'll ask, what's the fingering for B natural on trumpet? And the kid will go, first valve. No.
Well, you're
it's
stupid.
Yeah. So the tone of my voice just says the kid is dumb.
Right. But that's what I heard is what I said.
I would go, well, that's actually for a B flat, but I'm asking for a B natural. Someone else, please.
Right.
And that way the kids aren't afraid to answer because you're not in their face with your finger 2 inches from their nose going, that's the incorrect answer. And sometimes it is kind of if it's a really dumb answer, because people say there's no dumb questions, but there's certainly dumb answers. Sometimes the whole band kind of gets it and we all just kind of smile and we just go on.
Right.
They'll answer and we all just kind of smile. Oh, not quite there, but someone else,
Right.
And plus in a rowdy group, especially a younger group, you'll ask this question you've prepared and you're going to get a great answer. Some kid will raise their hand and you'll call on them. They'll say, my dog had puppies last night. You just got to prepare for that. So you can't you could get mad if you just happen. It's going to happen. So you might as well just kind of smile and go, that's awesome. How many puppies? What kind of dog? And so, it was 6 and they're a German Shepherd. That's awesome. Now back to my original question, because they've just got all this stuff inside of them.
I'll be the band kid you're talking about right now because I'm curious. As you're doing this, though, I would think it's important to not always let the same kid answer all the time. Because there is that kid that knows all the answers and wants to answer every time to show everybody how smart they are.
Yes. And that brings up a really good technique. Ask the question to an entire group and always just have it in your culture. They raise their hands to answer. Then call on someone who doesn't have their hand up.
Yeah.
And it's not to put them on the spot. I mean, be supportive. But, sometimes a kid they're shy. They just don't want to take a chance of answering. They don't want to be the center of attention. And we just want to give them a brief moment where they're a part of the group vocally.
Right.
But you're absolutely correct, Derek. That's a great way of handling it is, so raise your hand if you know this and tell me how we can learn that quicker. And, 30 hands will go up. Call on the one the kid who doesn't have their hand up.
My household, when we would have dinner, after dinner, we all watched Wheel of Fortune together. I don't know why. It's just what we did. And it wasn't my whole growing up period, but for a period. Yeah. But my dad called that show Blurt. B-L-U-R-T. Because we would all sit around watching, and the first person that thought they knew the answer would just shout it out. Right or wrong, they just shout it out.
Blurt it out. I get it. Yeah. And I love that.
Sometimes I think in our classroom management, we have to watch out for blurting. That you got everybody blurting out what they think is right, whether you ask them or not.
Boy, that is a tough one. I think one example, I had a little horn class. There was only 9 kids. They were super intelligent. But they would just blurt out whatever they were thinking at whatever time. Because with 9 kids, it doesn't feel quite correct to raise your hand. You know what I mean? It's just like too small of a, but sure. That was hard to get them into that. So what I finally had to do, I met one of these guys, shout out to Matthew Huffines. He's a choir director now, but he was in that class and he was the instigator of doing this. And I saw him at convention last February. And I said, do you realize you're the creator of the question box? And he goes, oh my gosh, I did not know that. And I said, yeah. So I had this box and they had pieces of paper. And if they had a question, they had to write it down and put the slip of paper in the box. And I would answer it the next day.
Right.
And I'd pull out the slips of paper. But Matthew Huffines was the instigator of the Mike Lunney question box in French horn class because they were super intelligent kids. They'd ask, I was watching YouTube and they got these Wagner tubas, but it's more like a French horn. But I know it's like a couple of Wagner symphonies, those kind of kids.
Right.
And it's really hard to be mean and shut them down, because they're super intelligent. So take that for what it's worth. The blurters, we'll call them the blurters, because they're just excited. And we've even had those people in our faculty sometimes in faculty meetings. You're sitting there going, oh my gosh, I wish they'd quit blurting out things.
We all want to go home.
Yeah, we just, this is the last faculty meeting, the last day. The only thing you're that question could cause the rest of us to be just this much more dumb. Not one rational thought was executed by that statement, faculty, fellow colleague.
And that's
You
really
know,
where I was going with because I think the question box is great. It actually forces the young person to say, is this question worth the effort of writing this out? If not, let it go.
and if they'd write it down and it wasn't worth it, I had a red Sharpie. I'd put an X through it, and I'd give it back to him the next day. So Derek could get his question with a red X through it. He knew that meant that wasn't worth answering.
So they got feedback.
They got feedback, and it was all done kind of tongue in cheek. There wasn't anything mean about it. The next thing is, especially in an interview process, is you have to have what I call an order of discipline. What order do we go in as we discipline things that happen in the band program? And for me, it was quite simple. This order of discipline was up on the front of the classroom, and they understood that the first level was to be called out in class. Just a simple, hey, you're talking too much. I need you to be quiet. Can you kind of stay with us and just kind of close your mouth and play your horn, please? That was the first level of discipline. The second level, if they continued, was to set them out of the setup. This is really effective in all bands, but especially those younger bands.
Right.
I have a chair stand or two in the back of the band hall, so they wouldn't have to move their equipment. They just have to get up with their horn and their music and go back there. They'd still have to play, but they'd be set out of the setup. And, proximity is your friend. If they're close enough, they can touch their neighbor and they're a rowdy kid.
Oh.
That's gonna get them going. They hate that. The next one, the third level, was do an assignment for misconduct. And if Rick will help me, we'll post these on the webpage. But they're just little paragraphs, and it has to do with talking too much in class. One is forgetting your instrument. Another one is caring for your equipment. And what they would have to do is I had manila envelopes that had these in it with a spare piece of paper and a pencil that was sharpened. And then I would pull that out of the box, and I'd write their name on it, hand it to them, and they knew that they had to finish that. So They'd go, and they didn't like that at all, especially since I stapled the extra page to the one they're copying. So they had to flip back and forth. Can we remove the staple? No, that's part of the process. So I need all that together. Mr. Lunney will lose the copy if you do that, So I just make an excuse that it was my fault that they had to do it, but it was to irritate them. And the good part was it wasn't just writing sentences. These paragraphs actually have a lot to do with this is our band culture.
Right.
And this is why forgetting your horn affects you as a student and affects me as a director and affects the entire ensemble. So it's an educational process, even though it is rote punishment. Okay. If they got through all of that and still were causing a problem, the next step was I'd call the parent. And if you're calling a parent, make sure you take the team approach. If you're out there trying to put together a discipline plan, the best approach is, hey, Derek, I'm having a problem with your son in band. These things are happening, but I'm calling you because I need some help. What things could you tell me that would help to get me to have your son behave better in my classroom?
Right.
Much more effective than, Derek, your kid's a troublemaker. And, he's the one I like the most when they're absent. When they're absent, I know it's going to be a good day. That's not a very good approach to talking to a parent, even though in your heart of all hearts, it's the God's honest truth. When that kid's not
being genuine.
Yeah. When that kid's not there, you're thinking, man, it's going to be a good day. So-and-so's not here today, but you've got to approach the parents as we're working on this together. And trust me, guys out there, it doesn't always work. I've had parents tell me verbatim, this appears to be your problem, and they hang up on me. I've had other parents say, well, could we schedule a conference? Because I'd really like to sit down with you and tell you some things going on with my son or my daughter. No problem. Let's figure this out. And it's just a lot more. I know it sounds so PC, but it's just a lot more effective to work as a team than to fight the parent.
And I don't want to flesh this out for 30 minutes. I don't want to hijack it, but I do think we're dealing more and more. You and I aren't necessarily dealing with it, but there was a time that if I got in trouble at school, when I got home, it was just going to happen all over again.
Oh gosh, yes.
Mom and Dad were like,
Lord,
man, and it's not a dishonor of the family necessarily as much as you know how to act and you know what the consequences are going to be. And I do think that we've become somewhat more of a, hey, thanks for babysitting my kids for 8 hours well, I do what I want to. And I'm not saying everybody,
Right.
but the attitude
But
that
there is
goes
that
with that
percentage.
is, hey, they're on your time. That's your problem.
Yeah. You're exactly right.
And I think people hear all the time, they don't do that at home.
Yeah.
I bet they do that at home. You just ignore it.
Yeah. And when I first started teaching, it was expected to give SWATs with the Board of Education.
Yep.
And I've had parent conferences and I hated doing it. And I tried to do anything possible not to do it. I think there's nothing worse than having anybody, but especially someone who's just supposed to be an educator, beating a child with a wooden plank.
I get it.
There's just something wrong. But what I was coming to is the idea that I don't know how many times when I was working, when I'd have the parent conference and the parent would go, "Can I go ahead and give him 2 SWATs with your board?"
Wow. Really?
And I'd go, "Sure." And sometimes you'd have to kind of call the parent off. When they'd give that first SWAT and you'd kind of jump in between, "Oh, I think we're okay here." That kid lifted like 6 inches off the ground. You know what I mean? And my SWATs were pretty, I don't know. I didn't like that, but it was expected. If you didn't give SWATs, you weren't considered a disciplinarian during that era. So yeah, you're right. It's changed. I know when I was growing up, I grew up in military schools. And if my first words out of my mouth when I was in trouble was, "Do whatever you want to, principal, just don't call my dad." Whatever you want to do, you can beat me, you can put me in ISS, you can take me out of recess for the rest of the year. Whatever you got to do, sir. But please don't call
Let's
my
keep
dad.
this in-house, please.
Yeah, just whatever, please. And it was kind of sort of that way when I first started teaching. All you had to say, and especially small towns, was, "Do I need to call your mom?" They're like, no, sir. No, sir. Don't call my mom.
You do not need to do that.
And then you look at the kid and go, "Well, what are we going to do to fix this?" "Yeah, I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to shut up." "Very good. Thank you. Thank you. That's going to be awesome." So, but remember, I have access to your mom's phone number at work. I know. In fact, I ate lunch down at the cafe and she works down there. So I'm going to see her at 12 o'clock.
Right.
So keep on your side if you can. The principals will love that.
Go back to the beginning of the bullet because I hijacked you so bad. First thing you're going to do is call them out in class.
Yes.
Then you're going to separate them.
Yeah.
What'd you call it? What's the proper term?
I call it set them out of the band setup.
Okay. And then call the parent?
Nope. They do the assignment for misconduct.
Assignment. There we go. Okay.
And they have to finish that before they get back in the setup. That might take some of them like 4 days because they'll kind of
it's a big paragraph.
Lollygag back there. It's like, well, you can sit back there the rest of the year for what I care. That paragraph is not that hard, but
right.
You're making a choice here, son. Right. And so eventually they finish it and stuff. And then make sure you read them. If you use these things, make sure you read them because some of the really awesome spirited children will put they'll write between the lines a little bit. Mr. Lunney is a blankety blank. And so, make sure that you kind of proof them when you get them. Don't just because they'll try to get by with things. And I never punished them for that. I'd always kind of point at as a Mr. Lunney is a blankety blank. I'd go, "That is correct."
And you're about to find out.
Yeah. And they would just kind of look at you like, "Oh my gosh." Yeah.
Call them out in class, separate them from the group, writing assignment, or whatever the proper term you call it. What do you call it?
I call it assignment for misconduct.
Yeah, there you go.
That's what we called it. And then call the parent.
Okay.
And then after that, we send them to the principal's office. And the admin likes that whole process because there's 4 levels before you even speak to an administrator.
You say, look how documented it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've done process.
And at this point, the kids know the 7 stages of punishment. Once it gets to the principal, that's the 5th level out of 7. So make sure whatever discipline plan you have, you want to convince the administrators and you want to follow this plan because it'll help you tremendously that you're going to do whatever you can to, number one, keep all those discipline problems out of the principal's office. But at the same time, you want a trail of documentation if you need to get them in the loop.
Right.
Because they don't want all those kids lined up, but they don't want to be blindsided. Like I've been dealing with this kid for 6 weeks and now we're bringing him down here and the principal's going, "What?" So I could email him what we'd all done and the kid could recite the 7 levels. I'd say recite the 7 levels to the principal and they'd recite them and the principals love that because the teacher that sends the kids chewing gum, go to the principal.
Right.
Kind of thing. And then
the principal knows you're serious if you got to level 5.
Yeah. And level 5, the principal knows that it's the next level is a parent conference. They would actually have the parents come up. And I hate to say this to parents that might accidentally listen to this, but I always tried to schedule parent conferences the most inopportune time for the parent. If it was a doctor, I tried to do it on Wednesday afternoon because that's when they go golf.
Right.
So I would try to find the worst possible time for them. That's the only time I could do it. And so I just wanted to make it where they had to really go out of their way to be at this parent conference, because I never said, when would be a good time for you as a parent? I would say Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock works for me. That's when we have to do it. And so they're having to take off work. They might be missing money, wages. And I hate to say it that way, but it's the truth. Quiet
But
part
they're
out loud.
very invested in that meeting.
They're very invested at that time, because guess what the next level was? And the principal agreed upon it. Remove student from program.
Okay.
If we get to the 7th level, then I never once had an administrator go, Mr. Lunney, we just really need to keep him in band or her in band. If you could document and prove up to 7 levels and multiple situations up to 4 or 5 levels, then finally you could pull that card. For those listening, don't make it a habit. I can think of maybe 20 times in 30 years that I, quote, kicked a kid out of band. It had to be where it was so egregious that it was unsafe maybe for the kids around them. We had no idea what that kid was going to do next. It wasn't chewing gum and forgetting their horn.
Right.
Okay. So, but have those levels. And if you spell that out in an interview, or better yet, give a quick synopsis, not a podcast worth, but a quick synopsis, and hand it to them and say, this is my discipline plan. And then always at the end of that process, always go, but I'm more than happy to make my plan edited to fit what you need done with your school. This is your campus. I'm merely one of 30 teachers on your campus. This is a Word document. I can change it.
Right.
So you just pencil in.
Say that too.
You just pencil in the things you don't like and cross out whatever, and pencil in how you like things done, and I will change.
Or you might even.
They're the boss.
You correct me though. It gives them an opportunity. You might even say, as you're talking about it, if you have questions about any of those, I'm glad to explain why I do that way.
Exactly. And on the other way too, if the principal does something and you're, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. You know how to assign discipline according to how the next level of administration is going to deal with it.
Sure.
Because everybody has their pet peeves, and everyone has their, Mike, they're just kids being kids. Right. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you better know, because if you go through all this process and then you take them to the principal goes, I don't think this is that big a deal.
Right.
Then it's like, oh my gosh. So save your own process, and make sure you know how the principal, for the most part, is going to handle the situation.
And I know we're talking about creating this for interviews or just for classroom management, but I think it's great that we're also speaking to people who feel like they've had a plan already, but their plan doesn't include 7 steps. It just starts with number 7. Because I think I've heard you tell me before that you don't know if the administration is going to back you up. And if you want the quickest way to lose credibility and get stuck with a problem for the rest of the semester, just jump right out and say, I'm kicking you out. You're out of here.
Yes. And we've all played that game of poker chips with the admin. We do things that's in their favor to gather poker chips. And sometimes it's like Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, I really need this badly. And that means you're shoving all your poker chips across the table, saying, I've gathered this many poker chips. I would like to buy this favor for my band program. But if you're sending every kid down to the office and you don't know how the principal's going to react, then if you just come in and say, hey, next year, I would really love to have jazz band's second period, they're not even going to think about it. They're going to go, no.
Yep. We're already set up. Sorry.
Yeah, we're already set up. Sorry. But if you've done everything possible to keep kids out of their office and parents out of their ears, and done it correctly and ethically and respectfully and trusted the process, then they're more than likely, they might still say no, but at least they'll give you a reason. They'll say, well, let's look at this.
And I also think the quiet part of that is, at some point, that administrator is going to say, you just don't want to handle this. You just want me to handle all your dirty work.
Yes. Yes, they're not our sergeant at arms. And I had this argument with a guy who used to be the director at Hardin Simmons University because he told at the time his student teachers that discipline in the school is only on the shoulders of the principal. And they would come to me with that attitude, and I'd say, no, my discipline of me personally as a faculty member is solely on the shoulders of the administrator,
Right.
but not every student. So that's our job. That's what we're paid to do. And that was a tough.
That's why they hired us.
Yeah, and I'd like to throw this in there, and this is, I get some blowback on this statement. It's more important to establish discipline than it is to teach music.
Yeah.
Without discipline, the music will never be taught.
Right. Or we're creating good humans,
Yeah,
which is part of that discipline / management.
yeah. So it's two good things. One, you create better people, but we're there to also teach music. But without discipline,
There is no music.
yeah, there is no music. It's just a zoo. It's like monkeys in the cage. You're not going to control anything. You're certainly not getting anything done. But I think you might have seen it as a educational representative. I know I've seen it by going into band halls. You'll see a director just teaching their heart out on the podium, just saying incredible things and analyzing what's being played. But then you look across to the band and go, there's not one kid listening to anything that's happening. And then he just says, go back to letter A. And they go, okay. They play letter A again. And then they stop and he gives this dissertation on how to decrescendo. And they all just kind of start pushing and shoving. And I'm explaining the routine that we've all seen in our many anxiety-ridden nightmares. Yeah, one of those moments. So, but
I'm going to tell you this too, Mike. As an ed rep, it was very hard for me sometimes when I would go into a band hall, and I very rarely went in during a teaching time, or I tried not to.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
But
we didn't do business.
Sometimes you have.
Yeah.
Or sometimes I show up early and I just want to listen to the band, and they've invited me to do that.
Or the schedule changes. They've got a pep rally schedule, whatever.
And so when they would step off the podium, and this is the point I'm actually trying to make as much as when I was there, if that director steps off the podium, if that band turns into a zoo, as a trumpet player, one of the worst things, it just drives me nuts, is when all of a sudden that trumpet player in the band just plays the loudest, blattiest blast just to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to talk to a director, or he's told me he wants me there at that time. I'm not interrupting him as much as I'm doing what he asked me to. Spending way too much time on that. But you can tell a discipline level based on what happens when a director steps off the podium.
Correct. And I've clinic groups where that exact same thing has happened.
All of a sudden, the drummers just start beating everything they can beat as loud as they can.
Or if it's like a brass player just has that real splatty thing on the field just because you cut the band off, I just walk over and ask for their horn. I say, march the rest of the rehearsal without your instrument, please. And
that's the best sound you can make.
I don't go any further because I'm the clinician. I don't want to. If I was the head director, I might do that. But I just set it gently in the front, make sure it's safe and sound. So at the end of rehearsal, you can get your horn. We're done with this. And so they march the whole rehearsal, at triangle. So,
but it's kind of correct. You're talking about. I was just trying to compliment your point.
Yeah.
That how many band halls have we been in where we went? And one of the biggest indicators for me is what kids do when they think the director's not paying attention.
Yes.
So if they know the consequences, or it's a harsh sounding way, and if they know the 7 steps and they know what's going to happen if they violate a guideline, I think they we've had this conversation so many times. They want boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Kids want to know. And so all that is to speak to people that are already doing it, who might say, well, I've got a system of management, classroom management. Do you?
Yeah. I just shout at them till they leave. I don't know.
Anyway.
And so part of that is them understanding the definition of discipline.
Okay.
That discipline is not consequences. Discipline's that inner power that you control your own actions because of outside forces sometimes. But the last part of that definition, from what you alluded to, is also being able to control myself in a constructive manner when those outside forces are not present.
Right.
They need to understand that. They need to know that mantra, that discipline is not what I do to you. Discipline is what you do as a human being.
Discipline is how you conduct life.
Yeah.
And, I've heard it said with integrity. Integrity is what you do when no one's looking.
Right.
Not the same thing, but the same thing. Discipline is what you do when nobody's forcing you to do it.
Yeah. And to kind of wrap up our whole thing, these are just ideas I give to people when they call about it. Try to keep from involving admin unless it's totally necessary. Sending a student to the office for talking too much results in a couple of unwanted outcomes. Number one, your band will see that you are not the one in charge of consequences. You are not teaching discipline, or in this case, assigning consequences. So they see you as just someone who has no power because you can't solve anything in class. And then number two, this is a tough one because the admin will see you as weak and simply adding to their problems. That's my quiet part out loud. If you want to be seen as an inept, incompetent band director, because to the admin, it has very little to do with your musical product.
Right.
It has to do with how you behave in faculty and how you work your band program. I was always so proud that there might be a whole year that I did not send one kid to the office. And the principals were so ecstatic about that because they've all got that one teacher. They have 2 kids a period.
Right.
That come down because they forgot their homework or whatever. The other thing is this, I'll end on this kind of almost a sour note, but I think it's funny. The mantra is with a rowdy band, at the end of this period, I don't say this to them, this is what I'm thinking. At the end of this band period, someone's going to be upset, and it's not going to be me. Someone is going to be upset because we've all been there as a band director. And I know all my friends out there will vouch for this. I've had a band rehearsal where I just wish I would have done this and I wish I'd have disciplined this, and I leave and I'm just so mad at myself. It's like they just didn't behave. They blah, blah, blah. But then I'm upset and they go to class and they don't care.
They don't care.
They don't care. They just did what they wanted to do. But I always like that. That's a quote from Luke McMillan, by the way. He said, so, at the end of this band period, he actually said pissed off, said someone's going to be pissed off and it's not going to be me. And
so when you said that, I heard Dirty Harry. It's a question you need to ask yourself.
That's right.
Make you feel lucky.
Do you feel lucky today?
Do you?
So just with all that discipline stuff, and I know it takes time, and especially younger teachers, they get real excited about teaching music because that's what we live for. But man, you've got to take the time for that slog of, getting this done, because without a certain amount of discipline, and I'll be the first to admit, my bands were not some sort of military operation. We were pretty loose.
Well, good.
I mean, anyone who came. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. We'll throw that in as our last little moment. Younger teachers sometimes don't realize there's such a thing as good noise. They just shout down any little bit of something that happens, So you've got to understand there's good noise when someone turns to a friend and goes, "Hey man, measure 4, that second valve." Or if they turn to the friend and go, "Hey, after school, let's go to the Sonic. I like the cherry limeade. Do you like the cherry limeade?" "Oh, I don't like the cherry limeade. I got the new smash burger. Let's try the new smash burger." Then it becomes this full blown conversation, and that's not good noise.
Right.
A horn hitting the ground is not good noise. Valves being oiled, possibly a good noise.
Or
as you're rattling
along as somebody during psych.
Yeah,
that's good
noise. That's good noise. So I know we've thrown a lot out at them at one shot. Maybe we can get Rick to kind of post some of this for us. And
let's do this real quick. First step, just go back through your 7 steps with me real quick.
7 steps. That sounds like an AA meeting. 12 steps.
Well, it might be.
It might be. Number 1, call them out in class. Number 2, set them out of the setup. Number 3, have them do the assignment for misconduct. Have those prepared beforehand.
Right.
Number 4, call the parent. Number 5, send to principal's office. Number 5, schedule a parent conference at the most inopportune time for the parent. Number 7, ask to have them removed from the program. And that last one should be about once every 2 years if you're doing everything else right, or unless you're in an extremely toxic environment that you've got to right this ship real quick.
Sometimes when you're new creating culture, you might have to do that more often, I would think.
Yes, I would respect that.
But let me give my last thought, and you can close this with a yes or no. I think that so often, we've said it several times, young teachers or new teachers, or we want to impress in an interview so badly. We think about the music. We think about
Yes.
how awesome we could be, how awesome this program could be. I'm going to create an award-winning, no, and that's our focus. And maybe if we allowed for part of that process in our brain to be, and so to get there, we're going to have to create discipline. We're going to have to create classroom management, because you said it to start it, and I'm going to say it to end it. If you don't have classroom management, you probably won't have a musical.
Yeah. Not
Good.
probably. You will not have a
Okay.
good musical product. It will not occur. It's impossible. And my last thing to say about it is this whole elaborate discipline plan. Step one might involve 10% of your band. Step two, maybe 5%. Step three, maybe 2%. By the time you call a parent, that's maybe 1% of your band program.
Right.
So there's that other 99% that maybe their only sin would be to be talking too much, and you called them out and they went, okay, yes, sir. So don't think that you're up there like a DPS officer with a ticket book, that you're just constantly
Meeting a quota.
meeting a quota to see how many kids you can dethrone, so it's an elaborate system, possibly. I think it's an adequate system, but when it gets down to that last one, like I said, there's years I had 700 total kids in my full program, and maybe one gets kicked out of band every 2 years. So that's a pretty small percent, my friend. That's
Right.
0.04 or something,
And also, to your point, I think smart kids, good kids, learn from other people's mistakes.
Yes, and they like to see the plan.
Once they see that it's real, okay, let's
Yes.
fall in line and let's do the right thing.
And you're smart, people-pleasing kids. I like to think that when I was growing up, I hope that I was smart. I know I was a people pleaser. That if I know what the plan is, I'm going to do everything in the world for Greg Miller to say I'm a good band student.
Going to execute that plan.
Yeah, I'm going to have it out on my folder. Oh, don't do that. So it's you're really, really smart band kids that are people pleasers. Tell them what your plan is. That way they know where the obstacles are. They know where the potholes are.
And I keep saying, I feel like a preacher today. And my last point, everybody knows that's not your last point.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think that you only have to do this. Really, you only have to sit down and do this one time.
Yeah,
And
and just copy mine.
And stay consistent to it. It's not like you have to spend 2 weeks delving into your inner psyche of what is my classroom management.
Yes.
Because even by definition, your classroom management is not going to look exactly like mine, even though our bullet points do look the same.
Yeah, and I didn't do any of this I was not confronted with any of this as a junior high kid, high school kid, or a college kid, because the band culture was already built.
Right.
So when they asked me what my classroom management plan was in interviews, I really didn't know.
Right.
I thought it was be a good musician.
Right.
'Cause if you teach good music, they'll shut up and behave.
Everybody wants to be a good musician.
I wonder now if I could be a fly on that wall and watch the administrator interviewing me going, what the hell? Yeah, we don't even care if they make a 5. We just want the kids to shut up and not be in my office.
Right. And let's be real honest too, Mike. There are people out there that this is just a music credit, fine arts credit. You're a necessary evil.
Mama said be in band. You're going to be in band. You're going to Sunday school, boy.
But even from an administrator's point, I don't care how good your band is. I just need kids to get their credit.
That's right. That's right. Just got to get that ping satisfied.
So cool. Wow, we tangent all the time. Derek is the best tangent maker.
You're very undisciplined in that regard.
Have a great week. I got to go
You
talk
too.
to the principal.
That's right. I'm going to send you to the principal's office.